All of us want to be great, especially little boys as we're growing up. We see the great ball players, and we see the great heroes of the faith, and we hear about the great missionaries of old times, and we think, wow, we want to be great one day like them. We want to be like Adoniram Judson and William Carey. We want to go to new lands. We want to do great things for God. We want to kill a giant. Right? We want to do great things for God. We want to go before God. We want God to stand up to honor us like He did for Stephen when Stephen was murdered. And we want God to applaud us because we did really great things for God. We all want to be great. We want to do great things for God. But so very few do very few great things for God. It doesn't usually happen. Where in the Bible does it say that He needs us all to be great? Where does God say, I want all of you to be great people for me? That's not God's requirement. God doesn't require us to kill giants. He doesn't require us to be thrown into a den of lions. What God wants of us is that we be found faithful, as our God is faithful to us. There is many people in the Bible that God specifically called out by name and said, these people are faithful. Moses, God called him faithful. Abraham, Tychicus, Epaphras, Onesimus, Paul, Silvanus. Of course, Jesus Christ is called the faithful. Antipas, David, Hananiah, Shelemiah the priest, Zadok the scribe, Pedaiah, Hanan, Uriah, and Zechariah. Those are all the lists of the people that God specifically called out in the Bible and says, these people are faithful. So, it's an admirable quality. We all need to be faithful. What exactly does it mean to be faithful? Well, part of it, a lot of it, is that you're here right now. You're here on a Sunday afternoon. You just ate a lot of food. You're getting sleepy. You're ready to get to the martial arts right now. I can already tell. But you're saying, no, more important than anything else is that I be found faithful for my God.
Amen.
Let's turn to 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 33. 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 33. It's a story of a father who lost his son. And that father would be David, who mourned and grieved over the loss of his son Absalom. David, you would say, is one of the greatest men to ever live. He killed a giant. Right? He could have killed his own king, but he says, no, even though the one that's pursuing me, King Saul, I'm going to let him live. Even though I know he's going to continue to try to kill me. He became a great king, one of the greatest kings there ever was. He was God's chosen one to begin his monarchy for his people. Jesus Christ is of the line and lineage of David. He's the one who's received the Davidic covenant. David was a great guy. He was a great man. He did great many things for God. And look at the life of David. Look at 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 33. It says, and the king was much moved, and went up to the chamber over the gate, and wept. And as he went, thus he said, O my son Absalom, my son, Absalom, would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son. Let me ask you something. At this point in David's life, do you think that he felt like he was doing great things for God? Do you think he felt pretty happy about how he had killed the giant? Do you think he really cared about that at this moment? He didn't care. Do you think he cared that he was the king of God's chosen people, the Israelites? No, David didn't care about that right now. Do you think David cared that God had chosen him over all the others, just a poor shepherd boy, to be his ruler? No, David did not care about that. What did David care about at this time? His son Absalom, who had just died, who had just been killed. And he said, oh Absalom, how I wish to God that I would be able to die for you. Oh, if I could die and bring you back. Oh, that I could just forget about all the victories I've won. If I could just have never won a single battle. If I had never marched in a single army or killed Goliath or done all of that. All of my accomplishments, how gladly I would have given them up if I could just have you back. My son Absalom, my beloved. Where did David go wrong? What happened to David? David had done so many great things. It's that in David's life, he was not found faithful. Faithfulness is required of stewards, is required of servants, is required of us today. God does not demand us to kill Goliath. He does not demand that we raise an army and fight against the armies of the wicked. God says, what I want for you is that you simply be found faithful. Is that you get up in the morning and you open up your Bibles and you start your day out with words of prayer. And that you go on your job. It doesn't have to be in the ministry, your secular job, or not your secular job. Whatever job that God has called you to do, is that you do it faithfully. Let's turn to the book of Numbers, chapter 12, verse number 7. Numbers, chapter 12, verse 7. This is speaking about the man Moses. And we're going to go ahead and read. It's a short chapter, so I'm just going to quickly go ahead and read through the whole chapter. And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. And they said, hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. And the Lord spake suddenly unto Moses and Aaron and unto Miriam, come out, ye three, unto the tabernacle of the congregation. And they three came out. And the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle, and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forth. And he said, hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I the Lord will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all mine house. With him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in dark speeches. And the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Wherefore, when we were not afraid to speak against, then were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle, and behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. And Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said unto Moses, alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not the sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly, and wherein we have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, of whom the flesh is half consumed, when he cometh out of his mother's womb. And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, heal her now, O God, I beseech thee. And the Lord said unto Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed 7 days? Let her be shut out from the camp 7 days, and after that let her be received in again. And Miriam was shut out from the camp 7 days, and the people journeyed not till Miriam was brought in again. And afterward the people removed from Hazeroth and pitched in the wilderness of Paran. Here Miriam and Aaron were talking back and forth. And Aaron and Miriam were saying, you know what? We're not that bad. You know, we actually are doing a pretty good job here. There's been a few times where we've had Moses' back. And you know, God hasn't just spoken through Moses. God's also spoken through us. And God has used us, not just Moses. And here Moses is taking all the credit. Here Moses is the great man that God speaks to and speaks face to face. And Aaron and Moses were whining about it. Saying, we think we should have a little bit more authority and power and decision making. And God says, hey, Miriam, Aaron, Moses, in the tabernacle now. You know that's not going to go well. Here Aaron and Miriam were talking bad-mouthing Moses, and then God speaks to them suddenly, it says, and says, we need to talk. Get in the tent. You know, Miriam and Aaron were thinking, oh boy, I'm in trouble now. It's like being called to the principal's office. Or at work, when the boss calls you and says, close the door. That's happened to me a couple of times at work. And boss says, hey, can you come here for a sec? And I said, sure, boss. I follow the boss, and the boss says, can you close the door to my office? I know something not good is about to happen when they ask you to close the door. And that's what God did to Aaron and Miriam. He says, guys, you guys are getting pretty lippy over down there. I think that the three of us need to have a little conference and let's work this out. So God says, let me tell you, Aaron and Miriam, let me tell you about my servant Moses. He says, if there's things that I need to tell people, I'll tell it to them in dark sayings, and I'll use prophets. And I'll give those prophets dreams and visions. But let me tell you about my servant Moses. I speak to him mouth to mouth. That means I talk to him and Moses talks back, and I talk to him and Moses talks back, just like a couple of old friends, talking back and forth in a nice, pleasant conversation. God says, that's my man Moses. And then he pays Moses the highest compliment that he could give. He says, you know what, Aaron and Miriam? My guy Moses, he is faithful. And when that word was spoken about the man Moses, that was it. Aaron and Miriam knew that they were done. They could not go against a man that God had said, this person is faithful. If David had been faithful in his family, faithful in his marriage, faithful in raising his children and disciplining them, if he had just been faithful in the day-to-day things, he would have been a better man than the man that goes out and kills the giant. He does great things for God. God's not looking for you to do great things. He's looking for you to be faithful. Let's turn quickly to Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9. It says, know therefore that the Lord thy God, He is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love Him and keep His commandments to 1,000 generations. How long is God's faithfulness? 1,000 generations long. And obviously it's a whole lot longer than that. God's faithfulness is everlasting. He is the eternal God with eternal faithfulness. And so God says, hey look, if you will just love me and follow me, I will be faithful to you longer than you can be alive. Or your children, or your grandchildren, or your great-grandchildren, or great-great-grandchildren. God says you can count down to 1,000 generations, your great, so on and so forth. You can count down to 1,000 generations, and God says, I will still be faithful. Just love me. Just be faithful in everyday life that you live. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. It says, there hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. God says, when times are good, remember, I am faithful to you. Don't forget me. And still, you need to be faithful to me. And here God says, when you're tempted, remember, I am faithful to you. I will give you a way out. I am the faithful God. God reminds us over and over and over. It is one of His names that He gives Himself. He calls Himself faithful with a capital F. So we know, we can say, oh faithful friend, my faithful one, my God, my faithful God, will you be with me today? Will you walk with me today? As we are faithful to Him, God is ever more faithful to us. And as we are unfaithful to Him, God is still faithful to us. Amen. You see, when we become His child, we enter into what's called a covenant. It's the same, similar to a marriage. You've ever heard of a marriage contract? You've heard of a marriage contract, right? Yes. A contract is a legal document, and it says, if you do your part, then I will do my part. And if you don't do your part, I won't do my part. So they mutually together have to do their part. If I say I will pay you money to do a job, and you say, okay, you sign a contract, and you don't do the job, am I obligated to pay you to do it? No, you didn't do it. You broke the contract, and you released me from my end of the contract. And in marriage, it's called a marriage contract. Guess what? Marriage is not a contract. The world might look at marriage as a contract. But let me tell you what a covenant is. If you're married, you entered into a covenant. And this is the thing about a covenant. It says, if you don't do your end, if you do not fulfill your end of the agreement, if you do not keep your promise, if you do not follow what you said that you will do, I will still fulfill my end of the bargain. If you are not faithful to me, I will be faithful to you. If you do not take care of me, I will do my best to take care of you anyway. It's a covenant. Whether you love me, I will still love you. Whether you don't love me, I will still love you. It's not a contract, it is a covenant. And God has entered into a covenant relationship with His children, with us. And He says, I will be faithful to you. For 1,000 generations, I will be faithful to you. Why? Is it because we're so faithful? No. God says, because you're my child and I love you. And God has given us this great promise. He says, I'll be faithful to you, but wouldn't it be so much better for you? And God says, I'll do this. I'll do it regardless. I'll be faithful. But how much better would it be for you if you were faithful to me? I used to put a little picture, a little kid's drawing. It showed a fruit, like the forbidden fruit. It was an apple, but we know that the forbidden fruit was not really an apple. And it had a bite out of it. And it had a little saying. It said, disobedience is always a choice. Let me repeat that. Disobedience is always a choice. It sounds simple and childish. And it's really for the nursery students, so that they understand disobedience is always a choice. It's a lesson for us adults. Because every time we disobey God, it's a choice to do so. But I've had people come to me and I say, why did you do that? Why did you miss church Sunday morning? They would say, well, I'm choicing. Well, I'm choicing. I had to. I had to go to work, or I had to get my homework done, or I had to turn in my assignment, or I had to do this, or I had to do that, or I had to do this. And I would ask them, well, that's disobedience. You chose to be disobedient. No one has to be disobedient. Every time you are disobedient, it is always a choice. Let me ask you. Let's say that in order for you to fulfill the Bible, okay? Let's say that you had a commitment to God. You said, God, I promise, God, I make a vow, although I wouldn't take that lightly. I promise, God, that I will be in church next Sunday morning to pick up children to take them to church. Whatever it could be. Something you have made a promise to God, and you must fulfill it. And then your boss calls, and your boss says, you have to come into work. If you don't come into work, you will be fired. What would you tell your boss? What should you tell your boss? You should tell him, no, I'm sorry, I've already made a commitment. I'm not free to do that. What will happen to you? Maybe you'll get fired. Then what will happen to you? Well, if you own a house and you're paying on the house, guess what? You're going to lose your house. And now you're homeless. And what about eating? Where are you going to get your money to buy food? You can't. You don't have any money, so then you don't have food. You become homeless, and you become hungry, and then you start starving. And then you get sick, and you don't have medicine. You can't go to the hospital, you've got no money. You can't even eat. And then guess what? You die. Let me ask you, what is better? Just be faithful to God and say, God, I made a promise, I'm going to fulfill it. I'm not going to make excuses. I said I would do it, and God, so I'm going to do it. I'm not smart enough, God, to figure out some kind of loophole or some kind of other way around it. God, I'm just going to say, hey, I told you I would do it, so I'm going to do it. Maybe I'll lose my job, and then my house, and my food, and then I'm going to die, and I'm going to die in the street and starve to death. What one would be better? To break your vow to God, or to die to death slowly and die a miserable death? Which one would be better? It's better to die a slow and painful, miserable death than to lie to God. It's better to die than to disobey God. And David understood that. Near the end of his life, when Absalom had died, he said, oh, nothing compares to obedience to God. Disobedience is always a choice. Now let me ask you this question. Now that we agree, right? Always obey God. Always obey God. The consequences do not matter. Whether it be in life or death, riches or poor, health or not, or in sickness, the consequences don't matter. We need to be faithful. We need to obey God. Let me ask you this. Let's say the boss calls you up and says, you have to be at work right now, even though it would be a sin to do something like that. Do you think that God would let you? Our faithful God, our Father, our friend that loves us so much, do you think He would really let you starve to death on the street and die a slow, miserable death? I don't think so. But you know what? If I'm wrong, it's worth it. It's worth it. If God were to tell me that the consequences for obedience to Him would be death, I would say, Lord, take me. I'm ready. I'm ready to serve you. If that's what it means, it's better to die than to sin against God. There was a time where Jesus went to Peter. And He said, Peter, He said, there's going to come a day where they're going to take your arms and they're going to carry your arms and carry your legs to a place where you don't want them to go. And some people said, oh, it's because He's going to get old. No, it says, they're going to carry you, Peter, to a place you don't want to go, not to where you do want to go. That was talking about the death that Peter would die. That's talking about the crucifixion of Peter. And tradition says, not in the Bible, but tradition says that when it came time for His crucifixion, which He knew was coming, because Jesus said, before He ascended, Jesus told Peter, Peter, guess what? One day you're going to be crucified for me. And Peter, according to tradition, said, I knew this was coming, I knew I was going to be crucified, and I want you to crucify me upside down. I don't deserve the death of my Savior. If you were Peter, and Jesus were to tell you, guess what? If you remain faithful to me, you will most surely die a death, a cruel, painful, torturous death of crucifixion. All you have to do is stop being faithful. Not worth it. You need to be like those men that have the list in the Bible, where God mentioned them by name and said, they were faithful. There's a time where Joab was pursuing one of his enemies. You know Joab, the general of David, the king? He was pursuing one of his enemies, and his enemies hid inside a walled city. And Joab says, I'm going to tear down this wall, destroy the city to kill my enemy. I don't care how many of you die. I don't care that the city is left unprotected and this wall destroyed. I will kill this enemy. So if you get in my way, too bad for you, not my problem. The city was friendly to Joab's enemy. And then a woman yelled out over to Joab. And she says, would you kill a faithful mother in Israel? She was pleading with Joab, saying, Joab, there's a type of person that you would never want to kill. You would never want to kill a mother. Now would you, Joab? And Joab says, no, I wouldn't want to kill a mother. And then she said, and how about would you ever want to kill a faithful mother? It was kind of like a safe word. It was kind of like a word you use, and instantly, if it's true, then it automatically gets respect. You can say, I'm a giant slayer. Well, that's great. But if you say, I am faithful to God, and it's true, there's no greater reward than that. And one day we can stand before our Savior, the one that died for us, and He can look upon our face, and He can say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You might say, well, I just work a secretary job, I come home tired, all I want to do is just, I get up, I go to work, I come home to sleep, so that way I can get up and go to work the next day. Right? You're kind of in that routine. And you say, how could God use a guy like me? How could God use a girl like me? God can use you. Just be faithful.